Incoming transmission.
Hello, this is Matt and McKinley from History Dispatches.
We are the father-son duo bringing you the weird, the wild, the wacky, and the craziest tales from across time.
From the Ice Bowl
to the Great Heathen Army.
And the head of Oliver Cromwell.
The same head they kept on a pike for 3 years?
Yep, all here on History Dispatches.
New episodes every weekday.
Find out more at historydispatches.com or wherever you get your podcast app.
Welcome to Fun Facts Daily, your source for just the good stuff. Monday through Friday, we're bringing fun facts and news you can use, all carefully curated to uplift and inform. So give yourself a break, relax, and learn something awesome in just a few minutes every day. Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Wood, and today we've got a sweet episode talking about maple syrup, that glorious amber liquid we love to drizzle on pancakes and waffles. But before we get into the facts, let's warm up our brains with a little challenge to see if you can tell truth from fiction. Sometimes myths get passed along as fact, and sometimes the truth is just hard to believe. Think you can tell fact from fiction? It's not always easy. Consider this. We often hear about bank robberies, art heists, or jewel thefts as major crimes, but what about a syrup theft? Picture this, a covert operation spanning months targeting a massive warehouse storing barrels upon barrels of maple syrup, essentially Canada's strategic reserve of liquid gold. Could it be true that thieves managed to pull off the biggest theft in Canadian history by secretly siphoning off nearly 3,000 tons of maple syrup, worth almost $18 million, from the Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers Reserve? Could a clandestine group really deplete such a significant portion of the nation's syrup supply? What do you think? Does this massive multi-million-dollar syrup heist sound like an actual fact? Or is it just a sweet fabrication too wild to be true? Take a moment to think about it. If you're listening with friends, feel free to pause the show and talk it over. Go ahead, I can wait. Hopefully you can too, because the answer will be coming at the end of this episode. Now for our word of the day. Today's word of the day is sugaring. As a noun, sugaring refers to the overall process of collecting maple sap and boiling it down to make maple syrup or maple sugar. You might hear people talk about the sugaring season or visiting a sugaring operation. The term obviously comes from sugar, highlighting the primary purpose of the activity, concentrating the natural sugars found in maple sap. It encapsulates the entire journey from tapping the trees, often in a sugar bush, the term for a forest stand of maples used for production, to the final boiling in a sugar house or sugar shack. It's a word deeply tied to the tradition and labor involved in producing this natural sweetener. Now for our daily high five, our top 5 fun facts about maple syrup. Number 1, it takes a surprisingly large amount of maple sap, about 40 gallons, just to produce a single gallon of finished maple syrup. Maple sap, when it first comes out of the tree, is mostly water, typically around 98% water, with only about 2% sugar content. To transform this watery liquid into the thick, sweet syrup we know and love, it needs to be boiled extensively. This evaporation process removes the excess water, concentrating the sugars and developing that characteristic maple flavor. The exact ratio can vary slightly depending on the sugar concentration of the sap, which fluctuates based on the tree, weather, and time of season. But the 40-to-1 ratio is a good average. This intensive boiling process is why pure maple syrup production is energy consuming and why the final product is more expensive than imitation syrups made primarily of corn syrup and artificial flavors. Number 2, The flow of maple sap needed for syrup production is triggered by a specific weather cycle of freezing nights and thawing days. Maple trees don't just produce sap continuously. The sap run typically happens in late winter and early spring when temperatures fluctuate across the freezing point. During the cold nights below freezing, negative pressure develops inside the tree, drawing water up from the roots. As temperatures rise above freezing during the day, positive pressure builds up inside the tree, forcing the slightly sugary sap to flow out of any opening, like a tap hole. This freeze-thaw cycle acts like a natural pump. If the weather stays consistently below freezing or consistently above freezing, the pressure changes stop and the sap flow ceases. This dependency on specific weather conditions is why the maple syrup season is relatively short and why climate change poses a potential threat to the industry. Next up, long before Europeans arrived in North America, Indigenous peoples had already mastered the art of collecting maple sap and making syrup and sugar. The discovery of maple sap's sweetness and the techniques for harvesting and concentrating it originated with the indigenous communities of the northeastern woodlands, such as the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mi'kmaq peoples. The traditional methods involved tapping trees with carved wooden spiles, collecting the sap in birch bark containers, and often concentrating it by dropping heated rocks into the sap or letting it freeze overnight and removing the layer of ice, which was mostly water. Maple syrup and sugar were valuable food sources, flavorings, and trade items. Early European settlers learned these techniques from the indigenous peoples, adopting and later adapting them with metal tools and boiling methods. But the history of maple syrup is deeply rooted in indigenous knowledge and innovation. Number 4, maple syrup grades primarily indicate color and flavor intensity, not overall quality or purity. They use terms like golden delicate taste or dark robust taste. Modern maple syrup grading systems, which were harmonized between Canada and the US, focus on color, clarity, density, and flavor characteristics. Generally, syrup made earlier in the season tends to be lighter in color with a more delicate maple flavor. Think golden delicate taste or amber rich taste. Syrup made later in the season, as temperatures warm, is typically darker and has a more intense, robust maple flavor. All these grades are pure maple syrup of high quality. The choice depends on personal preference and intended use. Lighter grades are often preferred for table syrup for pancakes and waffles, while darker grades are excellent for cooking and baking, where a strong maple flavor is desired. So these different grades, lighter or darker, don't mean lower quality, just a different color or bolder taste profile. Our fifth and final fun fact, the Canadian province of Quebec is the undisputed king of maple syrup, producing more than 70% of the entire world's supply. While maple syrup is produced in several Canadian provinces and northeastern US states, Quebec dominates the global market by a huge margin. The province has vast forests of sugar maples, as well as a well-established industry with thousands of producers. In fact, Quebec produces roughly 3 times more syrup than the entire United States combined. This dominance led to the creation of the Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers, which regulates production, maintains quality standards, and manages the global strategic maple syrup reserve to help stabilize prices and ensure a consistent supply even in years with poor harvests. Quebec's liquid gold is a major agricultural export for Canada. Now for some news you can use. If you invest in a bottle of delicious pure maple syrup, you want to make sure it stays fresh. Here's a simple but crucial tip. Always store pure maple syrup in the refrigerator after opening it. Why is this important? Unlike imitation syrups that are loaded with preservatives, pure maple syrup is a natural product. While the boiling process sterilizes it initially, once opened, it can be susceptible to mold growth because it still contains about 33% water. Leaving an unopened container at room temperature creates an environment where airborne mold spores can thrive on the surface. Refrigeration significantly slows down or prevents this mold growth, preserving the syrup's quality and flavor for much longer. An unopened container is fine in the pantry, but once the seal is broken, the fridge is its best friend. And now for the moment you've been waiting for. Time to tap into the truth. Earlier, I asked if the seemingly unbelievable story of a massive maple syrup heist from Canada's Strategic Reserve amounted to the biggest theft in the nation's history. Is that fact or fiction? Brace yourselves, it is absolutely fact. Known as the Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist, this extraordinary crime took place between 2011 and 2012 at a warehouse in St. Louis de Blandford, Quebec, which stored part of the global strategic maple syrup reserve managed by the Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers. Over several months, thieves gained access to the facility, gradually siphoning off syrup from barrels and replacing it with water to avoid immediate detection, then transporting the stolen syrup, as I said, around $18 million worth, to sell on the black market. The theft was only discovered during a routine inventory check when inspectors noticed barrels felt lighter or sounded wrong. It led to a major investigation and multiple arrests. So, yes, the biggest theft in Canadian history really did involve thousands of tons of stolen maple syrup. Truth is sometimes sweeter and stickier than fiction. I hope you enjoyed learning about maple syrup with me today. Be sure to follow Fun Facts Daily on your favorite podcast app and tune in tomorrow for even more fun facts. Fun Facts Daily is an Airwave Media podcast. It was written, recorded, mixed, and edited by me, Kyle Wood. Thanks for sharing a part of your day with me. Be sure to follow Fun Facts Daily on your favorite podcast app so you can keep the good stuff coming your way every day. And if you like the show, please do me a favor and leave a kind rating, review, or just tell your friends about it.